You've saved $3 million, you're 55 years old, and you are ready to get the heck out of Dodge. That's right. It is time to retire or start thinking about it, right? There's no more unnecessary meetings that we all know could have been an email, no more bosses to report to. You now control your time. That's retirement, right? You're trading in your paycheck for your time. Congratulations. Here's the question. Is $3 million actually enough to hang it up and call it quits at 55 and to retire comfortably for the next 30 to 40 years? Because if you've been watching my channel, you know the goal is to retire. What comes next? Stay retired. And most people think that number easily guarantees financial freedom, but what comes next may actually really surprise you, because yes, $3 million is a really big number. And if you've hit it, before I go any further, first off, congratulations. That is something to be incredibly proud of. But here's the truth of what most retirement calculators and headlines won't tell you, is that it's so much more than what you just spend every single month. You also need to start factoring in things like inflation, rising healthcare costs if we're retiring pre-65 and we have to pay that out of pocket. What about taxes, or where do we take our first dollar from? You see, it starts to get a little more complicated than it just looks on paper as a basic math equation. And so that's exactly what we're going to unpack today in this video. Is $3 million really enough to retire early at 55 once we factor everything in? And if you're just joining us for the first time, I'm Nick Covio, certified financial planner. All right, so let's meet Frank and Janet. They're 55 years old and wanting to know whether or not they could retire early. Frank, he's in upper management, and the long hours, they're starting to get old, even though the pay is really good. And Janet, she's been a middle school teacher for over 30 years, enjoys her summers off. But let's be honest, this last batch of kids left her questioning how many more years she actually has left in the tank. Now, they have 2 grown children, empty nesters, and they're incredible savers. And for many years, they've constantly lived beneath their means. And, that said, now being empty nesters, over these past couple of years, they've started to treat themselves just a little bit more. And they do live in a high cost of living state in California, and they have about $120,000 left on their mortgage. It's locked in at a pretty good rate, and they spend about $10,000 a month. Now, by all accounts, they've done everything right, and this has positioned them to be able to be flexible, to figure out, can we retire? Should we work another couple of years? But nonetheless, they could really call their own shots in a lot of ways. But here's the thing. Every time Frank goes to run his online retirement calculations to see how close they are, depending on the website, depending on the market, his answers are wildly different. One day it's, hey, you could retire. The next it's, ooh, you better wait till 65. And that's a lot of volatility. It's a lot of frustration, and it could feel really overwhelming and confusing. And so that's what we're going to dive into here today, is figuring out the real issue. Is even though they've done everything right and they have $3 million saved up, they have no way of really knowing how far away they actually are, how close they are to retiring at 55. They feel stuck in between 2 things, which is wanting to leave a career that's no longer fulfilling in the same way it used to be, but also fearing that if they leave their jobs too soon and things go bad in the market, then it could really blow up their entire retirement plan. Now, if you too are feeling stuck in a similar situation to Frank and Janet, what I want you to do is click on the link in the description below. We'll fill out a survey. We're going to ask you a couple questions about where you're at today financially, and we're going to send you a personalized Zoom video that analyzes your specific situation, how close you are to retirement, and show you the things that you need to do to get to your goal. Now, for Frank and Janet, this wasn't just a math problem. You've heard me talk all the time about retirement being a basic math problem. That's the income you have coming in, whether that's Social Security, a part-time job, rental income, or a pension, which we know Janet will have, minus your expenses. And whatever amount that you're short, that shortage needs to come from your portfolio. And we take that shortage, the amount coming out of your portfolio, and we divide it by your total portfolio. And that's where we get our distribution rate. And I'll show some numbers here on the screen in just a moment of where we want our distribution rate historically to be to give our plan the best shot at long-term retirement success, and how that number changes if we retire sooner and younger as opposed to waiting until our late 60s, early 70s. Yes, that's all fine. But for Frank and Janet, it was deeper than that. And this is where things get really challenging. It's not just a math equation. It's how do we make this decision right when we're on that knife's edge of, should we retire, or are we really retiring too soon? You see, for Frank and Janet, each day at work felt heavier and heavier. They found themselves constantly trapped between, are we wasting the most valuable years of retirement in a job that we probably don't need to keep doing, or are we gambling with our future by leaving too soon? And hey, this is where financial planning really shines. Because retirement planning, it's all about options. It's packed with endless possibilities. Do we want to work later and spend more, retire earlier and spend less? And this is one of my favorite parts of my job, is helping clients arrive at these decisions together. Retirement success can be boiled down into these 4 questions. And the first question is, do you know what you're currently spending? And spending in retirement is more than just what you spend, right? It's all these other things, taxes, healthcare, those not so fun things, right? Number 2 is, do we have a plan to bridge the gap between your retirement and when Social Security kicks in? Chances are during that time, you're no longer going to have income. Maybe in Janet's situation, you're going to have a pension coming in, but chances are if you're retiring at 55 or 60 or even 62, then you're going to be waiting probably till 65, 67, 70, whatever your plan calls for, to start taking Social Security. So that money is going to have to come from somewhere. That could be from a part-time job. That could be most likely from your portfolio and what you've saved. And so during this time, I refer to this as the golden window, where our income is now lower because we're not yet taking Social Security. We're no longer working. And so we need to figure out with our plan during this time of our golden window, when our income being lower, what do we do with that? Do we use this strategically for Roth conversions and tax planning? That's one aspect. Or do we use this to qualify for lower Affordable Care Act insurance? Do we get those health premium tax credits because now our income is much lower? So it is all about options that we have to be able to make sure that our plan accounts for. Now, the third thing that we absolutely need to account for is, what if there's a really nasty bear market year 1 in retirement or in the early stages of our retirement? It's not if, it's when a bear market or a correction happens, and how are we going to adjust to that? Because going back to that notion that retirement is just a basic math equation, if what we need coming out of our portfolio is now divided by a smaller figure, all of a sudden our distribution rate, what did it do? It just popped up. And now if we continue, let's just say our distribution rate went from 3.5% to 5%, we know that's probably not sustainable for a 30 or 40-year retirement. And so how does your retirement plan have contingencies on that? What are we going to be doing for that time? And I'll show you in just an example here with Frank and Janet, being able to make those adjustments to say, hey, if a bear market or when a bear market happens, how do we make those adjustments to make sure we're not overspending? And then lastly, as we stress test our retirement plan, are we accounting for things like inflation, long-term care costs, taxes, those types of things? So let's go ahead and dive into Frank and Janet's EMoney simulation here and see how we ran through these different scenarios to account for, can they afford to retire? And if they can, what are some sacrifices they may need to make to get to that magic 55 number? Okay, so let's look at Frank and Janet's EMoney profile. We know here that they have $3 million of investable assets. And the nice thing is that it's spread out amongst a Roth IRA, a brokerage account, which is going to be taxed at capital gains rate. We love that. And then the rest is in pre-tax 401k, a rollover IRA money. But point being is that they have tons of investment flexibility. And as I mentioned earlier, they're spending about $10,000 a month. They have a small mortgage remaining. And then they have some miscellaneous insurance policies. And then we're also going to need to account for travel and retirement, which is a big goal of theirs. They want to spend big. They're willing to adjust that if they need to, but they want to spend big for about 15, 20 years until they begin to slow down. And then they also have health insurance that we know is going to be a significant cost depending on how much it comes out to until they both hit that magic number of 65. Now, they came to us saying, hey, we're right on the doorstep of retiring at 55, but can we actually do this? And so when we looked at our Monte Carlo simulation, which tells us what is the likelihood, the probability of success, if we put all of these simulations, their variables inside of a vacuum, and we look at the last 100 plus years worth of data to figure out what happens if a nasty bear market occurs. What about 2008 or the Great Depression? Would these same circumstances and variables hold up? And we look at it and it says, well, proceed with caution. It's not saying it's a no, but a lot of things have to go right in order for them to retire at 55, to spend $10,000 a month on top of a mortgage, taxes, health insurance, and to travel $15,000 a year. as well as to leave money to things that are important to them, whether it's their kids or different causes and charities and things like that. But remember, retirement's all about adjustments. It's all about options. And so some of the work that we did with Frank and Jenna is we said, okay, well, let's take a look. What if we just trim our spending just a little? We could still retire early. What does that look like? And now instead of spending $120,000 a year, $10,000 a month, they are now looking at spending $8,000 a month. Pretty doable, right? It allows them to do all the exact same things and just cut spending by about $2,000 a month. You could still travel. We could still pay for out-of-pocket healthcare expenses. We could still give to the things that are most important to us. And now our retirement is absolutely on track. And one of the things that we want to do is stress test to say, okay, what happens if we run this exact same situation and now all of a sudden a nasty bear market happens? You see, that's really bad because now all of a sudden our $3 million, what if that goes down to $2.5 million, $2.2 million, and we're continuing to spend the exact same amount? You see, when we looked at their initial situation, their distribution rates were around 4.5%, 5.5%. And while that may not seem like a whole lot, when we put this in context, looking at what we call the Trinity study, which is almost 100 years worth of data telling us how much we could have as our initial starting withdrawal rate and continue to have a long, successful retirement. For Frank and Janet, if we're somewhere in that 35 to 40 year time horizon for retirement, one of the things that we're going to notice is that withdrawal rate needs to be a lot less than, say, if we're going to plan for a 20-year retirement. And so their numbers need to be somewhere in the 3 to 4% range. For them, being at the high fours or low fives, there's a really high probability that they're going to need to make some adjustments. And so when we ran those reports, one of the things that we came back with said, hey, this is causing a lot of stress. I absolutely see why the different retirement calculators are giving you conflicting answers. When you add in all the different variables, but what if you gave yourself just a little cushion? So what if we were to look at what does it look like to just trim our spending just slightly? So now, instead of spending that $150,000, $160,000 a year, we're trimming that down to $120,000, $130,000, and now we get something closer to 3.5% to 4.5% distribution rate. And then what's really nice about this is as we start looking at this, those numbers start to come down when Social Security begins to kick in, right? And so all of a sudden, we begin looking at our distribution rates and we could pull that off, right? Because before, if we were to go back to their first year of retirement and we were to look at, now what happens if there's a big market correction? That's an 8% distribution rate. Now, again, we said we need to stress test this. So what happens during that time if we have that contingency plan and we still have a nasty market correction? What if we just trim our spending temporarily to give our plan some breathing room? We see if we cut our spending from that $10,000 a month to closer to now $6,000 or $7,000 a month temporarily, we're actually okay. And what that's going to tell us is now when we look at that same scenario, and now we're spending a little less, we're actually okay. And what if Frank just returns to work temporarily? It goes back to that notion that retirement is a basic math equation. And now if we're adding just a little bit of income in, $50,000, $75,000 a year for the first couple of years, we're no longer needing to draw as much. And it gives our retirement portfolio some breathing room, regardless of what happens during a nasty market sequence. And if we want to be really thorough about this, we could fact check it against another study here, which is the Vanguard Boglehead. It says, hey, if we retire at 55, depending on how we have our assets allocated, that's going to be a whole other portion, which is probably going to be a separate video of, well, how do we structure our investment portfolio to make sure we have enough income to replace our paycheck? Because we don't want to have it too aggressive and run the risk of being overexposed during a nasty bear market, but we also don't want to be too conservative. So at 55, we have to stay in that 3 to 4.5% range. Whereas if we wait till 62, we could spend a little more. Retirement's all about having options. This is one of my favorite things to do for clients is to run those different scenarios to see what is most important to you. For Frank and Janet, they wanted to get out of their job. They were willing to take a pay cut. They were willing to spend less in retirement if it meant that they could retire with confidence and clarity, knowing their number, knowing that regardless of what happens in their circumstances, that they control their distribution rate, they control their spending, they understand what they have to do. But now we have a clear goal that says, if we spend $8,000 a month, we could still travel, we could still leave money for our kids and for charities and for our churches. These are the things that are most important. And most importantly, we can enjoy these years. So now that we've gone from uncertainty to having a plan, and more importantly, having a plan that gives Frank and Janet clarity, confidence, and a plan that's resilience, one that instills confidence, we now know that retirement plans, they don't fail, they just simply adjust. You see, for Frank and Janet, they had the numbers all along, but they needed to figure out one of the most basic but important questions of retirement, which is what's most important to you? So if you find yourself at age 55 or anywhere close and wondering, can I afford to retire? I don't want you to guess. Don't rely on online generic calculations, website articles, those types of things, because they don't know you and your exact situation. What I want you to do instead, click on the link in the description below, fill out the survey, tell me a little bit more about your unique retirement situation. And what I'll do is I'll send you a personalized Loom video back, breaking down whether or not you can retire early and how to make that happen. We'll show you what's working, where your gaps are, blind spots, things you need to consider, and things you want to change so that you can retire with that clarity and confidence. As always, thank you again so much for watching. It is a joy, a privilege, and an honor to make these videos and to educate you on retirement. Until next time, all the best.